Am I the a-hole for breaking up with my girlfriend after she rejected my proposal twice? Alright, so let me tell you how it all went down. I've been dating this girl, Kiara, for about 4 years now. I mean, she's amazing. Funny, smart, really chill, and we've always clicked. You know when you meet someone and everything just kind of falls into place? Yeah, it was like that with her. We met at this random party our friends dragged us to, and honestly, neither of us even wanted to be there. But we hit it off and spent the whole night just talking about stupid stuff, like bad movies and weird childhood memories. Anyway, fast forward a couple of years, and I knew I wanted to marry her. 2 years in, I was pretty sure she was the one, or whatever people call it. I started saving up for a ring, thinking I'd do it when I was in a better spot with money. I had this whole plan in my head that once I was in a more stable place, I'd propose. It felt like the responsible thing to do. Plus, I didn't want to half-ass it. Kiara deserved a nice proposal, and I didn't want to be stressing about money right after. So last year, after working my ass off and feeling like I finally had my life together, or at least not completely falling apart, I decided it was time. I was so ready to take that next step. Like, I was hyped about it. And not just me. Kiara and I had talked about marriage before. She seemed into it, always talking about how she couldn't see herself with anyone else and how she wanted to build a life together. So I felt like I wasn't going into this blind, you know? Like, it seemed like we were both on the same page. I planned the proposal for this beach where we went on our first date. We're both low-key, so I wanted it to be just us. No big public thing, no fancy restaurant where everyone's watching, just something personal. I remember that first date like it was yesterday. We didn't have much money back then, so we packed a cheap picnic, grabbed a couple of drinks, and sat on the beach talking till it got too cold. It was perfect. Anyway, the day of the proposal, I was nervous as hell. I mean, I was sure she'd say yes, but, it's still a big deal, right? I got the ring, planned the whole day, made sure we got to the beach at sunset because Kiara's always said how much she loves sunsets. The weather was perfect, by the way, like one of those days where the sky turns all pink and purple. It was almost like a sign that this was the right moment. So we get to the beach and I'm trying to keep it cool, but inside I'm freaking out a little. We're walking along the shore talking about random stuff and then I just stop, take her hand, and start talking about how much she means to me. I told her how much I love her, how I couldn't imagine my life without her. And then I got down on one knee, pulled out the ring, and asked her to marry me. Here's the part that threw me off. She looked at me, like, really looked at me, and didn't say anything for what felt like forever. Then she says, I want to marry you, but not right now. I was like, what? My brain couldn't process that at first. I just stood there, still holding the ring, probably looking like an idiot trying to make sense of what she just said. I want to marry you, but not right now. What does that even mean? I felt my heart drop, man. She said she wasn't ready for all the engagement stuff just yet. Like, she wasn't into the idea of being engaged and she needed more time. She didn't really explain it much further than that, just kind of said it wasn't the right moment for her. That hit me like a punch in the gut, but I didn't want to make a scene, so I just smiled and said, yeah, okay, I get it. But truthfully, I didn't get it. Not at all. We had talked about marriage. She had told me she wanted to be with me forever, and here I was, putting myself out there, only to get a half-assed rejection. But I figured, all right, maybe she just needs more time. After all, I waited a year to get my stuff together before proposing, so maybe she's just not in that place yet. I convinced myself that it wasn't that big of a deal and tried to shake it off. We ended up spending the rest of the evening pretending like everything was fine. But it wasn't. The whole vibe had shifted, and I was stuck in my own head, wondering if I had messed up. Should I have waited longer? Was it the wrong moment? Did I not know her as well as I thought? I didn't ask her any of this, though, because I didn't want to seem like I was pushing her. The thing is, I thought I was doing the right thing by giving her time. But looking back, I wish I had asked more questions. Like, I should have straight up asked her what she meant by, not right now. Was it me? Was it something else? Was she even serious about wanting to get married in the future? But instead, I just let it slide and told myself it wasn't a big deal. I spent the next year pretending like everything was fine, but it was always in the back of my mind. Every time marriage came up in conversation, I'd feel that sting again. But I told myself that maybe she'd come around. I mean, we were still happy, still going on trips, hanging out with friends, doing all the normal couple stuff. So I figured, all right, it's fine. She's just not ready yet. She'll get there eventually, right? But yeah, that's how the first proposal went. Not exactly how I planned, but I let it go because I loved her. I didn't want to push her into something she wasn't ready for. Little did I know that the whole not right now thing would become a much bigger deal later on. So after that first proposal, a whole year went by, and yeah, things were kind of weird sometimes. It was like we didn't talk about the whole I want to marry you but not right now thing ever again. I mean, I thought maybe we'd have a conversation about it after a few weeks or something, but nope, nothing. And honestly, I didn't want to bring it up either because I didn't want to seem pushy or whatever. We were still doing all the usual couple stuff, so I figured we were good. But the more time went on, the more I started to think, all right, maybe this is never happening. Like, why is she not ready? And why isn't she giving me a better reason than just not yet? It's like we're almost 30 and we've been together for 4 years. At this point, you either know or you don't, right? Anyway, I started planning another proposal because deep down, I still believed she wanted to be with me forever, just like she used to say. I was thinking maybe she just needed more time, and maybe I needed to step up the proposal game. The first one was low key, personal, just us two at the beach. But this time I figured maybe she'd want something a bit fancier. So I started thinking of something that would be a little more special, I guess. I decided to get some of our friends involved. I didn't want a public thing like the whole big crowd watching us. That wasn't my vibe, and I know Kiara's not into that either. But I wanted our closest friends to help me set it up. I thought it would make it more memorable. Plus, if we were surrounded by people we both care about, maybe that would make her feel more comfortable saying yes. So I started planning. I booked this really nice botanical garden that had this beautiful fountain area, the kind with all those big roses and greenery, and it's all super romantic. I knew she'd love it because she's obsessed with nature and plants. Honestly, she has like 20 plants in our apartment that I'm always accidentally killing. So I thought, yeah, this will be the perfect spot. I even got some of our friends to help set up. We had this plan to go for dinner first, just the two of us, at this nice restaurant nearby, then head over to the garden where they'd set everything up for me. Roses, candles, the works. It was going to be perfect. I was sure of it this time. So, the night of the proposal comes. I'm trying to stay cool, but inside I'm freaking out again. I kept thinking about last year and how I got shut down, and I was praying this time wouldn't go the same way. I didn't want to go through all that again. But I was optimistic, maybe too optimistic. Dinner went great, we were both in good spirits, and everything seemed perfect. We laughed, had some wine, and it felt like old times, like nothing was wrong between us. After dinner, I suggested we take a walk through the botanical garden. She was all for it, no idea what was coming, of course. We get to the fountain, and it's all set up, just like I imagined. Roses everywhere, candles lighting the path. It looked amazing. Our friends had done an awesome job. I take her hand and we start walking towards the fountain. At this point, my heart's pounding like crazy, but I keep my cool. We get there, and I give this whole speech about how much I love her, how I can't imagine spending my life with anyone else, and how I'm ready to take that next step. She's tearing up, and I'm thinking, this is it. This is the moment. I get down on one knee again, pull out the ring, and ask her to marry me. And then she says the same thing. Not just yet. I couldn't believe it. Like what? I just stood there for a second, trying to figure out if I heard her right. Not just yet? Again? I felt like I'd just been punched in the gut. It wasn't like last time where I brushed it off and told myself it wasn't a big deal. This time it was different. It hurt way more. I stood up trying to stay calm, but I had to ask. Why? What's stopping you? I was trying to keep it cool, but I was frustrated as hell. She looked at me, all teary-eyed, and said the same thing she said last year. She wanted to make sure things would work out, that she wasn't ready yet. And that's when I started getting mad. I asked her straight up if there was someone else, like maybe someone was influencing her. Maybe her parents, maybe a friend. I didn't know. It just didn't make sense. We'd been together for 4 years. How could she not know by now if she wanted to marry me? She shook her head and said no, it wasn't anyone else. She just needed more time. At that moment, everything just kind of hit me. I had waited a whole year since the last proposal. I had gone through all this effort to make sure this one was perfect. I thought we were in a better place, and yet here I was, standing in the middle of this beautiful garden, being told, not yet again. I felt like an idiot. Like, how many times am I supposed to ask? How long am I supposed to wait? I told her that. I told her if after 4 years she still wasn't sure, then I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't keep waiting for her to figure it out. It felt like I was putting my life on hold for someone who wasn't even sure they wanted to be in it for the long haul. She didn't say much. Just asked for more time, again. And that's when I snapped. I didn't yell or anything, but I was done. I told her, I can't do this anymore. I love you, but I'm not going to keep putting myself out there if you're just going to keep saying no. I could see the look on her face change. She realized I was serious. She started crying, begging me not to leave. That's when she said, fine, I'll marry you. Please don't go. And that's what pissed me off the most. Like she was only willing to say yes now that she knew I was ready to walk away. It didn't feel real. It didn't feel like she actually wanted to marry me. It felt like she was just afraid of losing me. I didn't even respond. I just walked away. I didn't know what else to say. My head was spinning, my heart was broken, and all I wanted was to get the hell out of there. After that second proposal, I knew something had to change. I couldn't just go back to pretending everything was fine like I did the first time. But for a couple of days, I didn't know what to do. My mind was all over the place. I mean, 4 years is a long time to be with someone, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to just throw it all away. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd never be ready. And if she wasn't ready by now, then when? I didn't talk to Kiara much the day after the proposal. She stayed in the guest room, which was kind of our unspoken way of handling fights. Just give each other space. Normally, by the next day, we'd talk things out and be good again. But this time, I didn't want to talk. I didn't even know if I had anything to say. I needed to process what had just happened. A couple of days passed, and I realized that I wasn't mad at her anymore. I was just disappointed. You know that feeling when you've put everything into something and you still come up short? That's where I was. Like, I did everything right, or at least I thought I did, and it still wasn't enough. It sucked, plain and simple. By the end of the week, we finally sat down to talk. She was the one to bring it up, actually. She sat me down on the couch and said we needed to figure things out. And yeah, we did. We couldn't keep avoiding it. So I told her exactly how I felt. That I couldn't keep waiting for her to figure out if she wanted to marry me or not. I said that if she didn't know after 4 years, I wasn't sure she ever would. She just sat there quiet for what felt like forever. Then she said, I do love you. I want to be with you. I just don't think I'm ready for marriage yet. And there it was again. That same damn phrase, not ready. I could feel my frustration building up again, but I kept it together. Why not? I asked. What's stopping you? I mean, we've been together for 4 years and we've talked about getting married before. You said you wanted this. She sighed, and I could tell she was struggling to explain. I don't know, she said. It's a big commitment, and I don't want to rush into something I'm not sure about. That's when it hit me. She wasn't sure about me. Not us, not the relationship, just me. And honestly, that hurt more than I thought it would. I could deal with someone not being ready to get married, but not being sure about me after 4 years? That was a whole different thing. I leaned back on the couch, trying to process it. I asked her straight up, Are you ever going to be sure? She looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't have an answer. She just sat there, staring at her hands, not saying a word. That's when I knew. I stood up and I told her, I can't keep doing this. I love you, but if you're not sure about me by now, I don't think you ever will be. And I'm not going to wait around forever, hoping you'll change your mind. She started crying. And yeah, it was tough to see. I didn't want to hurt her. I never did. But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. She begged me not to leave. She kept saying, I'll marry you, I promise. Just give me a little more time. But that's the thing. I didn't want her to marry me just because she was scared of losing me. I wanted her to want it, to be excited about it. And she wasn't. She was just scared of being alone. That wasn't the kind of marriage I wanted, and I wasn't going to settle for that. So, I told her I needed to leave. I packed a bag that night and stayed at a friend's place for a few days. I figured we both needed some space to cool off and think about what we wanted. But deep down, I knew it was over. There was no coming back from this. The next few days were rough. I kept going over everything in my head, trying to figure out where it went wrong. Was it me? Was it her? Was it both of us? I don't know. All I knew was that it didn't feel right anymore. The relationship had turned into something it wasn't supposed to be, and I couldn't fix it. That week, she called me a few times. I didn't pick up at first because I wasn't ready to talk, but eventually I answered. We had one of those awkward conversations where neither of us really knew what to say. She kept asking if I'd come home, and I kept saying I needed more time to think. The irony wasn't lost on me asking for more time after being pissed about her doing the same. But it wasn't the same thing. I wasn't waiting to decide if I loved her. I was trying to figure out how to move on. Then came the texts. Oh man, the texts. Her friends, her parents, even some of our mutual friends started blowing up my phone. Apparently, she'd told everyone I dumped her because she wasn't ready to get married. And of course, they all took her side. They called me immature, selfish, a jerk for throwing away a 4-year relationship just because she wasn't ready for the next step. But what they didn't understand, what none of them seemed to get, was that it wasn't about the wedding. It was about her not being sure about me. I mean, if someone's not sure about you after 4 years, how much longer are you supposed to wait? 5 years? 10? It felt like everyone was missing the point. The funny thing is, some of my friends didn't take her side. A few of them actually said they understood where I was coming from. They weren't taking sides exactly, but they weren't blaming me either. They knew what I had gone through, how much effort I put into the relationship, and that made me feel a little better, knowing I wasn't completely crazy for walking away. I think that's when I finally accepted that it was over. I wasn't going back. No amount of begging or promises was going to change the fact that she didn't see a future with me. Not really. I went back to our place to get the rest of my stuff about a week later. Kiara wasn't there, and honestly, I was relieved. I didn't want to deal with another emotional conversation. I packed my things, left my key on the counter, and walked out for the last time. And just like that, it was over. 4 years, done. And yeah, it hurt like hell. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I made the right choice. I wasn't going to settle for someone who wasn't sure about me. I deserved better than that. Update 1. So after I packed my stuff and walked out of the apartment for the last time, I thought things would be kinda easier. Like, I expected to feel this massive weight lift off my shoulders or something, but instead, everything felt heavy. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's like the breakup didn't really hit me until I was back at my friend Kyle's place, just sitting on his couch with my duffel bag at my feet. Kyle's a good guy, one of those friends who doesn't ask too many questions and just hands you a soda when you need it. He didn't try to pry or give me advice. He just let me crash at his place. And we spent most of the nights playing video games or watching dumb movies. It helped for a bit, but then the messages started rolling in again, and I couldn't escape the reality of what was happening. Kiara texted me almost every day. At first, it was the usual "can we talk" and "I miss you" messages, which I kinda expected, but then she started getting frustrated. I didn't answer her calls, so she'd send these long texts about how I was being unreasonable for not wanting to work things out. She kept saying stuff like, "You're throwing everything away over one small thing and you'll regret this." It pissed me off, to be honest. Like, I'm throwing everything away? I didn't know how to respond without starting another argument, so I just didn't. Ignoring her texts wasn't easy, though. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd feel this pit in my stomach. Part of me still cared about her, but I knew deep down that this wasn't something we could fix. I had to remind myself that this wasn't just about marriage. It was about her not being sure about me, about us. The thing is, when you spend 4 years with someone, you get used to having them around. Even if things were rocky towards the end, Kiara had been a huge part of my life for so long that I didn't really know what to do with myself now that she wasn't. I kept finding myself scrolling through old photos of us on my phone, looking at all these memories we'd made. It's stupid, I know, but it was like I was trying to figure out where things went wrong. Like, was there something I missed? Some sign that things were falling apart before the proposals? I spent way too much time thinking about that. Kyle told me I was overanalyzing it, and yeah, maybe he was right, but it was hard not to. When you invest that much time into someone, you want to believe that it all meant something, that it wasn't just a waste of time. After about a week of silence from Kiara, I started getting messages from her friends, and man, they were brutal. Some of them were straight up calling me a jerk for leaving her. One even said, "You're just scared of commitment," which is rich, considering I literally proposed twice. Another one of her friends wrote this long message about how I was being selfish for not giving Kiara more time to figure things out. Apparently, 4 years wasn't enough. But here's the thing. I know I said I wouldn't use that phrase. Her friend Ashley actually sent me a message saying, "You were just a safe bet for her. She'll find someone better now." Like, damn. I didn't respond to that one either, but it stuck with me. Was I just some backup plan for her? It wasn't like Kiara ever said anything like that. But the more I thought about it, the more I wondered if she was waiting for someone else, someone better, whatever that means. Meanwhile, my friends were giving me their own opinions. Kyle, as usual, kept it simple. "Dude, you're better off. If she can't decide after 4 years, she's never going to." My buddy Matt was a bit more vocal. He thought I should have left sooner, like after the first rejection. He kept saying, "Why'd you give her a second chance, man? She made it clear the first time." I didn't really have an answer for that. I guess I just didn't want to give up on her that easily. Maybe that makes me sound stupid, but I wanted to believe things could still work out back then. It was a weird mix of emotions. I was angry, frustrated, but also sad. And part of me couldn't shake the guilt. Every time I saw her friend's texts, I'd think, am I the bad guy here? I kept questioning myself, even though I knew I did what I had to do. Breaking up wasn't some knee-jerk reaction. It was something I thought about for a long time. But still, when you're getting hit from all sides with people telling you you're the asshole, it messes with your head. About 2 weeks after the breakup, I finally got a text from Kiara that wasn't angry. It was simple. I understand now. I'm sorry. I hope you find someone who makes you happy. That was the last message I got from her. No more calls, no more texts. It felt weirdly final, and I wasn't sure how to feel about it. On one hand, I was relieved that the constant back and forth was over. On the other hand, it felt like the last thread between us had been cut. I wish I could say that's when everything got easier, but honestly, it didn't. I still had moments where I'd think about her, about what we had, and what could have been. But over time, those moments got fewer and fewer. The more space I had from her, the more I realized that breaking up was the right choice. It hurt like hell, but it was necessary. I didn't want to be stuck in a relationship where I was always waiting for her to be ready. Eventually, I moved out of Kyle's place and got my own apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a one-bedroom in a decent part of town, but it was mine. I started focusing on myself more, hanging out with friends, hitting the gym, just trying to get my life back on track. And slowly things started feeling normal again. I'm not saying I'm over it 100%, but I'm in a better place now. Looking back, I realized that I deserve someone who's sure about me, not someone who needs years to decide if I'm worth it. It's still a tough pill to swallow, but I've accepted it. So yeah, that's the aftermath. It wasn't pretty, and I'm still dealing with some of the fallout, but I think I'm finally moving on. Update 2. So after months of adjusting to life on my own, I felt like I was finally getting the hang of things. It's not like everything magically got better or something, but things were just easier. I wasn't waking up every morning with that knot in my stomach anymore. Kiara wasn't on my mind all the time, and I wasn't constantly checking my phone to see if she texted. I had my routine, my space, and honestly, it was nice to have my own place again. I could leave dishes in the sink if I wanted blast music at 1 a.m., or just sit in silence with a soda on the balcony. No one to answer to. It felt good work was going fine. I wasn't one of those people who throws themselves into their job after a breakup or whatever, but having something to focus on definitely helped. I didn't think about anything else when I was knee-deep in projects or sitting in meetings. I think that was my biggest win, just being able to focus on something without getting distracted by thoughts of the past. But, as anyone will tell you, just when you think you're moving on, life has this way of throwing something at you to test if you're really over it. I was at a bar with Kyle one Friday night. We hadn't done a proper hangout in a while because we'd both been busy with work, so we decided to grab a few drinks, shoot some pool, and catch up. The night was going great. Laughs, beers, trash talking over pool, the usual. It was just one of those nights where you're not thinking about anything too heavy, just enjoying the moment. Then, out of nowhere, Kyle gets this weird look on his face while we're playing. I'm about to line up a shot when he says, dude, Kiara's here. I froze. My mind went blank for a second, and I just stood there with the pool cue in my hand, not knowing what to do. I hadn't seen her in months. Like, yeah, I knew she was seeing someone new, but it's one thing to hear about it through the grapevine and another thing to see it with your own eyes. I tried to play it cool, though. I didn't want to freak out or anything. I mean, it's a small town, and it was bound to happen at some point, right? I took a deep breath and casually glanced over. And there she was, sitting at the bar with a guy. They were laughing, having a drink, looking like they were having a good time. And you know what? It didn't hit me the way I thought it would. Yeah, my heart kind of sank at first, but it wasn't the gut-wrenching feeling I was expecting. I just stood there, staring for a second, then looked back at Kyle, who was watching me like I was about to lose it. I shook my head and said, "It's fine, man. Let's keep playing." And that was it. No big dramatic moment, no meltdown. We just went back to the game, and I did my best to act like I hadn't just seen my ex with someone else. It wasn't easy, though. Every time I looked up, there they were, laughing, talking, looking happy. It wasn't jealousy exactly. More like this weird mix of nostalgia and relief. Like, part of me missed her, but another part of me was glad it wasn't me sitting at that bar with her anymore. Kyle noticed I was kind of quiet after that, and he asked if I was cool. I told him I was fine, but deep down, I felt this weird emptiness. Not because I wanted Kiara back, but because it hit me that this chapter of my life was really over. Seeing her with someone else was like the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't just me moving on, it was her too. And that stung a little, even if I knew it was for the best. We finished up at the bar and decided to call it a night. Kyle kept asking if I wanted to grab another drink or hit another spot, but I told him I was tired and just wanted to head home. I think he knew I wasn't really in the mood for more socializing. When I got home, I sat on my balcony with a soda just staring out at the trees, thinking about how much had changed in the last few months. A year ago, I was planning a future with Kiara. Now she was just a memory, someone I used to know. It was a lot to take in, But at the same time, I felt this sense of closure. Seeing her with someone else, happy, made me realize that it was time to really let go. And that's what I did. I sat there on the balcony for a long time, just thinking about everything that had happened. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry or sad or confused. I was just okay with it. Life goes on, and so do people. Kiara had moved on, and so had I. It wasn't some dramatic revelation or anything, just a quiet acceptance that things were the way they were. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. It sounds cheesy, but it was like this big weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't holding on to any anger or regret anymore. Kiara was part of my past, and now it was time to focus on my future. Over the next few weeks, I started putting myself out there again. I'm not saying I jumped back into the dating scene or anything. I wasn't ready for that yet, but I stopped avoiding it. I went out more, talked to people, started thinking about what I wanted for myself, not just in a relationship, but in life in general. It's funny how breakups make you reevaluate everything. It wasn't just about moving on from Kiara. It was about figuring out who I was and what I wanted from life. And I realized that I still had a lot to figure out, but that was okay. I wasn't in a rush. For the first time in a long time, I was content with where I was. So, yeah, that's pretty much where things stand now. I'm moving forward. Slowly but surely. It's not perfect, but life never is. And honestly, I'm okay with that. I'm learning to take things as they come, to not stress too much about the future, and to just enjoy where I am right now. Who knows what's next? I guess I'll just have to wait and see. Sister-in-law DNA tested my daughter behind my back and paraded the results on my daughter. All right, so here's the situation. I've got a daughter, Lily. She's 6 now, and she's basically the best thing that's ever happened to me. But here's the twist. She's not my biological daughter. There's no blood relation between us at all. And before you ask, no, I didn't have a secret affair or some hidden relationship. It's actually way more complicated than that. But I'll try to keep things as straightforward as I can. Lily's mom was my best friend. We literally grew up together, like from the time we were kids until, well, everything that happened. We were never romantically involved. There were never any weird feelings or anything like that. Just two close friends who supported each other through everything. She met her husband when we were in our early 20s, and they were great together. I wasn't close to him in the same way I was with her, but he was a good guy. But life's messed up sometimes, you know? About 6 years ago, there was a horrible incident. My friend and her husband were at work, just doing their normal day-to-day stuff, and something terrible happened at their workplace. I won't go into too much detail because I want to keep some things private, but the bottom line is they didn't make it out. It was a workplace shooting. It was all over the news for a while. When it happened, Lily was just a newborn, like 3 months old. Now, here's the thing. Both my friend and her husband came from less than ideal family situations. They didn't have any siblings, and their parents weren't in the picture at all. I mean, technically they existed, but there was no way those people were going to be a part of Lily's life. They weren't safe people to be around, if you get what I'm saying. So, with both her parents gone and no extended family, Lily didn't have anywhere to go. I don't even think anyone thought about who'd take care of her in case something happened. I guess you don't really plan for that kind of thing, especially when you're young. Anyway, the thought of Lily ending up in the foster system just didn't sit right with me. I mean, I didn't want kids before all this. I wasn't really into the idea of being a parent. But here's this little girl, completely innocent, with no one to take care of her. It felt wrong to just stand by and let her grow up without any connection to her parents. So, I made the decision to adopt her. I'm not going to lie. It was hard at first. I had no idea what I was doing. Babies are not easy, and suddenly being responsible for this tiny human was terrifying. But the thing is, I learned to love her. It wasn't immediate, or some big emotional moment where I suddenly realized I was her dad. It was more gradual. Like each day I spent with her, I got more attached, and she became more of my kid. And now, I can't imagine life without her. Everyone in my family knows the situation. They all know Lily's not my biological daughter. It's not some big secret or anything. I've been open with her too. She knows she's adopted and that her real parents are gone because of a bad man. She doesn't know the full details, obviously, because she's still young, but she knows enough. And honestly, she doesn't really ask about it much yet. The funny part is, people often assume she's my biological kid. Like, she doesn't look anything like me at all, but people will just think she got all her looks from her mom. And I don't correct them. Why would I? It doesn't really matter to me what they think. If they want to assume she's mine, that's fine. I'm not going to sit there and explain the whole adoption story to random strangers. So that's the setup for the real story I'm trying to get to. A few weeks ago, we were at my parents' house for one of those big family gatherings. My brother's fiancée, who we'll call Sarah, was there with their 1-year-old son. We've all been getting along fine. I don't know Sarah super well, but she's been with my brother for a couple of years, and they've got a kid together, so she's part of the family now, I guess. Anyway, while we were there, Sarah saw this old photo hanging up in the hallway. It's a picture of me, my friend, Lily's mom, and her husband from way back when. We were probably in our early 20s at the time, all smiles and hanging out at some park. Sarah pointed at the picture and asked, "Who's this?" I explained that it was Lily's mom and her husband. I could see Sarah kind of processing the info, like she was putting things together in her head. She got real quiet and just stood there staring at the picture for a while. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe she just didn't know the whole backstory or didn't realize Lily wasn't my biological kid. It's not like I go around announcing it to everyone I meet. But the rest of the night, Sarah seemed a little off. You know when someone is being nice to your face, but there's something off about how they act? That's what it was like. Fast forward a bit, and we're all sitting around the dinner table. Out of nowhere, my parents announced they were setting up a college fund for both Lily and my brother's son. They were going to give each kid $50,000 to start them off when they got older. I was completely blown away by that. It's such a generous thing to do, and I could tell my brother and I were both really happy about it. But here's where things started getting weird. After that night, I noticed Sarah getting a little distant from Lily. Like, whenever Lily tried to play with her son, Sarah would come up with an excuse to separate them. She'd say he needed a nap, or that he was hungry or whatever. But even if Lily was just asking Sarah something simple, like, "Can I help with the baby?" Sarah would brush her off, saying she was busy even when she clearly wasn't. She was just on her phone half the time. It felt wrong, you know? Like something had shifted, and I couldn't figure out why. I chalked it up to her, maybe just being overprotective of her kid or whatever. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something was going on that I didn't know about. After that family dinner, things just got weird between Sarah and Lily. Like I mentioned, she started acting all distant and would come up with excuses to keep Lily and her son apart. I couldn't figure out what her deal was, but it was like she was purposely avoiding my daughter. It was subtle at first, but it started happening more and more often, and it wasn't just at family gatherings. It was all the time. At first, I thought maybe I was just overthinking it. You know, maybe Sarah was just being overprotective of her son, or maybe she was tired or stressed out with the whole parenting thing. But then, one day, things came to a head. It was a Saturday, and Sarah showed up at my place out of nowhere. No call, no text, nothing. She just knocked on the door like it was some kind of emergency. I opened the door, and there she was, standing there all serious, holding this folder in her hand like she had something super important to say. I figured it had to do with my brother or their kid, so I let her in, thinking maybe she needed some help or advice. The minute she walked in, I could tell something was off. She wasn't her usual self, and she was kind of fidgeting with the folder in her hands. I asked her what was up, and instead of getting straight to the point, she started pacing around my living room. Like, literally just walking back and forth. I'm standing there in disbelief, and before I can even say anything, she goes, "I did a DNA test on Lily using my son's DNA, and the results show that they're not related." She was looking at me like she expected me to react in some huge way, like she just uncovered some kind of hidden truth or exposed some big lie. I didn't even know how to respond at first. Like, she literally went behind my back, got a DNA test done on my daughter, who isn't even biologically mine, and now she's standing in my living room acting like she's the hero of the story. What was she expecting me to do with this information? Was I supposed to be shocked? Was I supposed to feel embarrassed or ashamed? I mean, it's not like I've ever hidden the fact that Lily's adopted. Everyone in my family knows, including my parents and siblings. I've been completely open about it. But Sarah? She acted like she just blew the lid off some deep, dark secret. And to make it worse, she wasn't done yet. After she told me about the DNA test, she said something that absolutely floored me. She looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "You're raising some dead woman's affair, baby." And she said it in front of Lily, who was sitting right there in the other room playing with her toys. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. First off, who even says something like that? And second, how dare she say something so messed up in front of my daughter? I just stood there staring at her, trying to process the insanity of the situation. And then, before I could stop myself, I started laughing. Like, full-on laughing. It wasn't even that I thought it was funny. It was just the sheer absurdity of it all. Sarah's standing there with her stupid folder of DNA results, looking all self-righteous, and I'm laughing in her face because what else could I do? Once I finally got myself together, I looked at her and said, "I know Lily's not my biological daughter. She's adopted. This thing called adoption exists, and maybe you've heard of it." Her face went beet red. She clearly didn't expect that reaction from me. I think she thought she was going to drop this bombshell, and I'd be all devastated and questioning everything. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, she was the one who ended up looking like a fool, and she knew it. Without saying another word, she grabbed her folder, stormed out of the house, and slammed the door behind her. I was still fuming after she left, but mostly I was just mad that she had the nerve to bring that nonsense up in front of Lily. My daughter didn't deserve to hear any of that, especially not from someone like Sarah. She's 6 years old. She doesn't need to be dealing with any of that kind of drama. After Sarah left, I sat down with Lily and made sure she was okay. Luckily, she didn't seem to have caught on to what Sarah said. I kept it light and just told her that some people don't always understand things the way they should, but that it didn't matter because we were a family no matter what anyone else thought. But I was pissed. And honestly, I was hurt too. How could someone in my own family, someone who's supposed to care about me and my daughter, pull something like this? What did she even think she was accomplishing? I mean, did she really believe I didn't know Lily wasn't biologically mine? Did she think I was raising her by accident or something? Later that night, I called my brother to let him know what happened. I was still heated, but I figured he deserved to know that his fiancée had gone behind my back and done something so insane. But instead of being shocked or angry at her, he tried to defend her. He said she thought she was doing the right thing by getting the test done. He said she was just trying to help. I lost it at that point. How on earth is DNA testing someone else's child without their permission considered helping? I asked him straight up, what was she hoping to accomplish? Did she think I was going to abandon Lily? Was that the plan? He didn't have much to say after that. Just kept saying she didn't mean any harm and that I was overreacting. But how was I supposed to react? Someone tested my daughter without my knowledge, threw the results in my face, and then basically insulted me and Lily in my own home. There's no way I was going to just brush that off. The whole thing felt like a betrayal, not just from Sarah, but from my brother too. The fact that he wasn't even on my side in this just made things worse. I didn't expect him to tear Sarah apart, but at the very least, I thought he'd have my back. Instead, he was making excuses for her behavior, and I wasn't having it. That night, after I calmed down, I sat with Lily again, just to make sure everything was fine. She was totally oblivious to the drama, thank God. And as I watched her playing with her toys, I just kept thinking how lucky I am to have her in my life, no matter what anyone else thinks. So after that whole mess with Sarah pulling the DNA stunt, things felt off. It was like this weird tension that nobody wanted to acknowledge. I hadn't talked to Sarah since she stormed out of my place, and my brother? He wasn't exactly on my side, but we hadn't had a proper conversation about it either. It was just hanging there, like a bad smell nobody was addressing. I figured, whatever. Maybe Sarah would calm down and realize how stupid and messed up what she did was. Maybe she'd apologize, and we could all just move on. But no, That wasn't what happened. A couple of weeks went by, and we were all set to meet up again at my parents' place for another family thing. I wasn't really looking forward to seeing Sarah, to be honest. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. Was she going to pretend like nothing happened? Or worse, was she going to double down on her nonsense? Either way, I was just going to keep my distance and try not to let her ruin the day. So we get there, and things seem okay at first. It was kind of awkward, but nothing out of the ordinary for a family gathering. Sarah was doing her thing, chatting with my mom, playing nice, all that. I was just keeping an eye on Lily, making sure she was having fun, playing with her cousins and whatnot. It was all pretty normal until, surprise, surprise, Sarah had another trick up her sleeve. At one point, my parents pulled me aside, looking all serious. My mom had that kind of concerned look on her face. You know the one, like she's about to drop something on you, but is trying to be gentle about it. My dad, on the other hand, looked pissed. That's when I knew whatever was coming wasn't going to be good. So, my mom tells me that Sarah had gone to their house a few days earlier. I was like, okay, what for? Thinking maybe it had something to do with my brother or their son. But no. Apparently, Sarah had told my parents that Lily wasn't my biological daughter, like it was some huge revelation. She'd gone over there all proud of herself, thinking she was exposing some big secret, like my parents didn't already know the whole situation. And as if that wasn't bad enough, she didn't stop there. She straight up told them that because Lily wasn't really my daughter, she shouldn't get the same $50,000 college fund that my parents had set up for the grandkids. She had the audacity to suggest that the entire $100,000 should go to her son because, according to her, he was the legitimate grandchild. I was speechless. Like, what the actual hell was wrong with her? Who does something like that? I felt this surge of anger rising up inside me. The fact that she was still trying to pull this crap, even after I'd already told her Lily was adopted, was beyond me. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to go behind my back and try to convince my parents to take away Lily's college fund. But here's the thing. I wasn't even mad about the money. I mean, yeah, that was messed up. But what really got to me was the principle of it. Lily might not be biologically related to me, but she's still my daughter. She's still part of this family. And for Sarah to try and push her out like that, to make it seem like she didn't belong, that was unforgivable. Thankfully, my parents didn't fall for Sarah's crap. My mom, who is normally the most gentle, understanding person in the world, apparently wasn't having any of it. She straight up told Sarah that Lily is their granddaughter, and nothing is going to change that. She said that if Sarah couldn't accept that, then she didn't belong in this family. And my dad, who's not usually one for big confrontations, backed her up. I could tell from the way my parents were telling me the story that they were really upset. My mom even said she kicked Sarah out of the house after she wouldn't drop it. I've never seen her that angry before. But honestly, I was glad they stood up for Lily like that. It meant the world to me that they had her back, that they saw her as part of the family no matter what. I guess Sarah didn't expect things to go that way, because ever since that incident, she's been quiet. I haven't heard a peep from her, and neither has my brother. Speaking of him, he's been keeping a low profile too. I'm guessing he finally had to have a serious conversation with Sarah about all the crap she pulled, but he hasn't said much to me about it. He did text me an apology at one point, but it was kind of vague. Like, sorry about everything that happened, kind of vague. No details, no real acknowledgement of what went down. But at least it was something, I guess. Honestly, I don't even know what their next move is. I'm not expecting an apology from Sarah anytime soon, but at this point, I don't really care. I'm just glad my parents stood their ground and made it clear that Lily is part of the family, no questions asked. Lily, of course, doesn't know anything about this. She's just a kid. She doesn't need to know that someone tried to take away her college fund or push her out of the family. All she needs to know is that she's loved, and that's exactly what I'm going to keep showing her. Every day, I'm going to make sure she feels that love from me, my parents, and everyone else who matters. I'm not sure what the future holds for our relationship with Sarah, but honestly, I'm done stressing about it. If she wants to come around and be part of the family, fine. But if she's going to keep pulling these stunts, I'm not interested. My priority is Lily, and making sure she grows up knowing she's got a family who loves her, no matter what some DNA test says. It's funny, though. You'd think after all this, I'd be more upset, but really, I just feel relieved. Relieved that the people who matter, my parents, Lily, and me, are all on the same page. And as for Sarah, she's the one who ended up looking like a fool. My brother and Sarah didn't reach out, and honestly, I didn't feel like being the one to fix things this time. It felt like the ball was in their court, you know? They were the ones who messed up, and if anyone was going to apologize, it should be them. But here's the thing. Family stuff never just stays quiet forever. It's like there's always something brewing under the surface, just waiting for the next blow-up. I knew eventually something would come up again, and it didn't take long for that to happen. So, it was a random Thursday when my phone buzzed. I checked and saw it was my brother. He hadn't called me in weeks, so right away I knew something was up. I answered, and the first thing he says without any small talk is, "Hey, can we talk?" Now, "Can we talk" is never a good opener, right? That's the kind of line you use when you know the conversation's going to be awkward or heavy. I sighed, mentally preparing myself for whatever was coming, and just said, "Yeah, what's up?" He started off by saying how he felt bad about everything that had gone down. He said he understood why I was pissed, but that Sarah wasn't taking it well, and he wanted to clear the air before things got worse. And of course, he slipped in there that Sarah felt really misunderstood, and that she didn't mean any harm. That's when I started getting frustrated. I mean, misunderstood? She literally tried to get my daughter's college fund taken away because she wasn't biologically related to me. That's not being misunderstood. That's just being cruel. But instead of blowing up at him, I kept calm, somehow, and asked, what exactly does she think she was doing that wasn't harmful? There was this pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, like he was trying to figure out the right words. Finally, he says, she thought she was protecting our family's legacy or some crap like that. He didn't even sound like he believed it himself. He was just repeating whatever Sarah had told him. He kept going, trying to explain how Sarah thought that since the money was coming from our parents, it should only go to their real grandchildren. And that's when I kind of lost it. I didn't yell or anything, but I was firm. I told him straight up, Lily is my daughter, period. If Sarah or anyone else has a problem with that, then they can stay out of my life. I'm not going to let anyone, family or not, make my daughter feel like she doesn't belong. There was another long silence, and then he said something that honestly shocked me. He goes, well, Sarah's not sure she wants to be around Lily anymore. Now, at that point, I had no idea where this conversation was even going. I mean, what was he expecting me to say? Oh, sure, that's fine. Keep your distance from my daughter because she's adopted? No way. I shot back. Then maybe you both need to figure out how important family really is to you, because if Sarah can't accept Lily, then we've got nothing else to talk about. It was quiet again after that. I could tell he wasn't expecting me to draw such a hard line. But honestly, what else was I supposed to do? I wasn't going to let Sarah's messed up views on what family means affect how my daughter feels growing up. That's not negotiable. Eventually, he said he'd talk to Sarah, but he didn't sound very hopeful about it. We ended the call kind of awkwardly, and I didn't feel any better about the situation. In fact, I felt worse. The fact that my brother was even entertaining Sarah's feelings on the whole thing really stung. Like, this is his niece we're talking about, and he's letting his fiancée create this toxic divide. It didn't sit right with me at all. That weekend, I took Lily to my parents' house again. I hadn't told them about the phone call because I didn't want to stir things up if I didn't have to. But while we were there, my mom pulled me aside. She could tell something was bothering me, so I just unloaded the whole story. The DNA test, the college fund drama, and now this latest bit about Sarah not wanting to be around Lily. My mom, bless her heart, was furious. She didn't yell or anything, but you could see it in her face. She just shook her head and said, that girl has no idea what family is. No idea. My dad, on the other hand, was more silent, but I could tell he wasn't happy either. He never liked drama, and this whole situation was becoming one big headache for everyone. We spent the rest of the afternoon hanging out with my parents, and Lily was having a blast, completely oblivious to all the nonsense happening behind the scenes. I kept thinking about what it would mean if things didn't get better. Would I really have to cut ties with my own brother because of Sarah's ridiculous ideas about family? It felt surreal, but at the same time I wasn't willing to compromise when it came to Lily's place in the family. Later that night, after we got home and I put Lily to bed, I got another text from my brother. This one was shorter, just a simple, "We need to talk again soon." I didn't respond right away. I was too tired to deal with it. Honestly, part of me was just exhausted from the whole situation. But I knew it wasn't over, and I knew we were going to have another tough conversation. The next few days, I went over the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what I'd say to my brother when we talked again. I wasn't going to budge on my stance, but I also didn't want to completely blow up the relationship. Family is complicated like that. You want to protect your own, but sometimes the people you're protecting them from are the ones you thought you'd never have to. It felt like I was in this weird limbo, waiting for the next move. And honestly, I was just over it. But I also knew that this wasn't something I could just ignore and hope it went away. Something had to give, and I wasn't going to be the one to let Sarah's toxic mindset win. Final update. So here we are. The big talk finally happened, and honestly, it went about as well as I expected, which is to say, not great. My brother called me up a couple of days after his vague, "We need to talk again soon" text. He sounded tired, like this whole situation was weighing on him too, which made me feel a bit bad. But at the same time, I wasn't going to let that cloud the bigger issue. We met up at a coffee shop, neutral territory. The minute we sat down, I could tell it was going to be one of those conversations where nobody really wins. He started off by saying how sorry he was for how everything had played out. He said he didn't want there to be any bad blood between us, and that family is important to him. But then, of course, he brought up Sarah again. He tried to explain how she was feeling, how she was coming from this place of wanting to protect her family's future, blah, blah, blah. It was the same stuff I'd already heard before. It was. I just sat there, listening, letting him get it all out. But when he was done, I told him straight up, "Look, I get that you're trying to keep the peace, but Sarah crossed a line. There's no justifying what she did. She didn't just hurt me. She disrespected Lily. And if she can't see that, I don't know how we move forward." He didn't argue with me, which was a relief. He just nodded, and then he dropped the question I knew was coming. "So, what now?" And honestly, I didn't know what to say at first. I've never been great at these types of conversations, but I told him the truth. What happens next is up to Sarah. If she's willing to apologize, if she can see how wrong she was, then maybe we can move forward. But if she's going to keep acting like Lily isn't a part of this family, then I don't see how we can keep pretending everything's fine. He sat with that for a minute. I could tell he was struggling, probably because he knew I was right, but also didn't want to admit it. In the end, he didn't make any promises, didn't offer any real solutions. He just said he'd talk to Sarah and we'd go from there. So I guess that's where things stand. I'm not holding my breath for some big resolution anytime soon, but at least I made it clear where I stand. At the end of the day, I'm not going to compromise when it comes to Lily. She's my daughter, and she deserves to be treated like part of the family, no matter what Sarah or anyone else thinks. And if that means things with my brother and Sarah stay awkward for a while, or maybe even forever, then so be it. My priority is making sure Lily knows she's loved, and that nobody, not even someone in the family, can make her feel otherwise.
At the heart of downtown stood a grand bank, its towering white columns gleaming under the morning sun, a symbol of prestige and wealth. Inside, Robert Calloway, the bank's manager, started his day with the usual air of confidence. For years, he had prided himself on maintaining control, enforcing procedures, and, above all, protecting the bank's reputation. But this day was different. Victoria Brooks entered the building with an air of quiet authority. Her tailored suit, flawless posture, and the fine leather briefcase she carried spoke volumes about her success. Yet, her presence sparked whispers among the staff and glances from the customers. She wasn't someone they typically saw in this space, and that alone seemed to set her apart. "Good morning," Victoria greeted calmly as she handed a check across the counter. The young cashier froze briefly, her eyes widening at the staggering figure on the check. Regaining her composure, she leaned in and whispered, "Ma'am, I'll need to direct you to our manager for this transaction." Victoria didn't flinch. She nodded, her expression steady as she followed the cashier toward Robert's office. Behind her poised demeanor was a quiet confidence that came from years of breaking barriers, but Robert didn't notice. He didn't look past her appearance. When Robert glanced up, his reaction was immediate, a fleeting look of doubt that betrayed his assumptions. "How can I help you?" he asked briskly, barely making eye contact. "I'd like to deposit this check into my account," Victoria replied evenly, placing it on his desk. Robert picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the amount. It wasn't the check itself that made him hesitate, it was who had presented it. "This is quite a sum," he said slowly. "We'll need to verify the source of these funds." "All the necessary information is provided," Victoria responded, her voice unshaken. But Robert's tone hardened. "Even so, additional verification is required. That's our protocol." In that moment, Robert saw only a client who didn't fit his idea of wealth. What he didn't realize was that Victoria Brooks wasn't just a client. She owned the bank. This wasn't just a routine transaction, it was the start of an extraordinary reckoning, one that would expose prejudice, challenge power dynamics, and set the stage for a transformation no one saw coming. Stay with Real-Life Stories New as we uncover how a single assumption became the catalyst for change, and a career left in ruins. Inside Robert Calloway's office, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Victoria Brooks sat calmly, her hands resting on her sleek briefcase. Across the desk, Robert scrutinized her check as if it were a puzzle he couldn't solve. Though every required document was neatly in place, his tone remained clipped, his gaze cautious. "This is quite an amount," he said again, as if repeating the statement would justify his doubt. "I'll need to verify the source of these funds." Victoria didn't waver. Her tone remained composed as she replied, "The information on the check is complete. You're welcome to contact my legal team if necessary. I expect this transaction to proceed without delay." But Robert wasn't convinced. He leaned back in his chair, his words growing sharper. "You may think everything is in order, but I have the right to investigate any suspicious activity. This check falls into that category." For the first time, Victoria's calm expression flickered. She furrowed her brow, her tone cool but firm. "Suspicious? Based on what, exactly? You have all the documentation. If there's an issue, I'd like to hear it." Robert hesitated, but then his tone betrayed him. "The issue is that transactions of this size are not typical for clients like you. I'm just doing my job." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Victoria held his gaze, her expression unchanging, but the tension in the room was palpable. Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. It was Eliza, the young cashier who had initially directed Victoria to the manager. "Mr. Calloway," she said timidly, "I've seen this client before. Her account is in good standing, and she's completed similar transactions with us." Robert's irritation was immediate. "Eliza, this doesn't concern you," he snapped. "Please return to your duties." Eliza glanced apologetically at Victoria, but she turned and left without another word. Meanwhile, Victoria's patience had begun to wear thin. She reached into her briefcase, pulling out her phone. "If you're unable to process this check," she said calmly, "I'll contact someone who can." Robert scoffed, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Whoever you call will tell you the same thing," he said dismissively. "This isn't personal, it's procedure." But before Robert could say more, the office door swung open. In walked a sharply dressed woman with an air of authority that immediately silenced the room. It was Jean Ellis, the regional director of the bank. "What's going on here?" Jean demanded, her sharp gaze sweeping the room. Robert scrambled to stand, suddenly uneasy. "Jean, I was just..." Jean didn't let him finish. Turning to Victoria, her expression softened. "Miss Brooks, I didn't realize you were here. Is there a problem?" Victoria gestured toward Robert. "It seems there's an issue processing my check." Despite having all the necessary documentation, Mr. Calloway insists on delaying the transaction for reasons that remain unclear. Jean's face hardened as she turned to Robert. "Do you understand who you're speaking to?" she asked, her tone icy. Robert faltered. "A client with a check that requires verification," he replied weakly. "I was following procedure." Jean's eyes narrowed, and she gestured toward the check. "That check," she said, "is from her corporate account. Miss Brooks isn't just a client. She's the largest shareholder in this bank." The color drained from Robert's face. He stammered, I didn't know." "You should have," Jean snapped. "Your failure to recognize one of our most important clients is unacceptable. And it's not just a mistake, it's a reflection of your attitude." Jean turned back to Victoria. "Miss Brooks, I sincerely apologize for this. Your transaction will be processed immediately." Victoria rose gracefully, collecting her belongings. "Thank you, Jean. I trust this matter will be addressed appropriately." As she left the office, Victoria paused briefly, meeting Robert's panicked gaze. Her calm demeanor only made the weight of the moment heavier. Without another word, she walked out, leaving Robert alone with Jean. "You've made a serious error in judgment," Jean said coldly. "And there will be consequences." For Robert, the reality of his situation began to sink in. His years of experience, his confidence, his authority, it all felt meaningless now. Jean didn't wait for his response. She turned and left, leaving him to contemplate the enormity of his mistake. Meanwhile, Victoria was escorted to the lounge, where Jean personally oversaw the processing of her transaction. The staff whispered among themselves, the weight of what had just happened spreading like wildfire through the branch. Eliza, standing behind the counter, watched as Victoria exited the building with her head held high. But this was far from the end. For Victoria, this wasn't just about her, it was about the culture of the bank, the biases that lingered beneath the surface, and the need for change. And change was coming. The next morning, in the bank's sleek headquarters, Victoria Brooks sat at the head of a conference table, her calm authority commanding the room. Across from her sat the management team, their expressions a mix of tension and regret. Robert Calloway, pale and visibly nervous, avoided her gaze. "Yesterday's incident was more than a misstep," Victoria began, her voice steady but resolute. "It revealed a failure in judgment and an issue that runs deeper than one person. This bank thrives on trust, trust that every client, regardless of background, will be treated with dignity. What I experienced was the opposite, and that cannot stand." The room was silent as Victoria continued. She outlined her vision for change, mandatory training on cultural awareness, a review of internal procedures to root out bias, and the establishment of a transparent complaints process for both clients and employees. Jean Ellis, the regional director, voiced her agreement. "This is necessary for the future of the bank. We cannot afford to let prejudice tarnish our reputation." Then Victoria turned her attention to Robert. "As for you," she said, her tone firm, "your actions reflect poorly not just on yourself, but on this institution. You'll be given the choice to resign or face a formal investigation." Robert nodded reluctantly, his career now in tatters. The consequences of his actions were undeniable. Later that day, Victoria returned to the branch. Spotting Eliza, the young cashier who had tried to intervene, she smiled. I noticed your courage yesterday, Victoria said. If you're interested, reach out to me. This bank needs more people like you. Eliza blushed, her eyes wide with gratitude. Around them, staff and clients watched as Victoria left, her head high, her presence unmistakable. This wasn't just a personal victory for Victoria, it was a turning point for the bank. A single act of courage had sparked a wave of change, proving that one person's determination can challenge bias and demand accountability. If this story inspired you, help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers by hitting the subscribe button. Share your thoughts in the comments, give us a like, and share this video to spread the message. Together, we can create a world where respect and equality are more than ideals, they're the standard. Thank you for watching Real Life Stories New.
My name is Emily Carter, a 45-year-old working professional and mother. For most of my adult life, I've lived under one roof with my husband, Thomas, and his parents. It wasn't an ideal arrangement, but we made it work. Or at least, I thought we did. Thomas and I met at a community event nearly 20 years ago. Our connection was instant, and within a year, we were married. It was a simple ceremony, nothing extravagant. Back then, I thought our love could overcome any obstacle. That belief carried me through the early years of living with his parents. They weren't bad people, but they were set in their ways. My mother-in-law, Margaret, had a knack for finding fault in everything I did, while my father-in-law, George, was more of a silent observer. He rarely intervened, but always seemed to be watching. It started subtly. Margaret would correct the way I folded towels, or hint that my cooking could use improvement. At first, I brushed it off as her attempt to help. Over time, though, her comments grew sharper, and her patience with me thinned. Thomas was often away for work, leaving me to navigate the tension alone. As the years passed, my role in the household expanded. When our daughter Lily was born, I took on the responsibilities of caregiving, household chores, and maintaining a part-time job. Margaret's health began to decline around the same time, and naturally, the caregiving duties fell to me. George helped when he could, but the bulk of the work was mine. "Emily, could you bring me my tea? And don't forget to use the good china," Margaret would call out from her armchair. I would comply, balancing her requests with everything else on my plate. Some days, it felt like I was running a marathon with no finish line in sight. One evening, while I was cleaning up after dinner, Margaret's sharp tone broke the quiet. "Why don't you spend more time with Lily? She needs her mother. You're always busy doing other things." Her words stung. I wanted to tell her that the other things were what kept the household running, but I held my tongue. I didn't want to cause a scene. Then a turning point came. Thomas's work required him to take an overseas assignment that would keep him away for almost a year. He assured me it was a great opportunity, both financially and professionally. "It'll be tough, but we'll manage," he said, kissing me goodbye at the airport. I nodded, hiding my unease. With Thomas gone, Margaret's demeanor shifted. The thin veil of civility she maintained when he was around disappeared. Her remarks became more cutting, her requests more demanding. "If you're so busy all the time, maybe you're not cut out to be a wife and mother," she said one afternoon, her words dripping with disdain. Lily, now a bright and observant 10-year-old, began to notice. "Mom, why is Grandma always so mean to you?" she asked one evening. I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to shield her from the tension, but I also didn't want to dismiss her feelings. "Sometimes people say things they don't mean, sweetheart. Don't worry about it," I said, hoping to reassure her. But the strain was undeniable. My health started to falter under the stress. Sleepless nights, constant headaches, and an overwhelming sense of fatigue became my new normal. I visited a doctor who confirmed that stress and exhaustion were taking their toll. "You need to find a way to reduce your workload," he advised. Easier said than done. One night after putting Lily to bed, I overheard a conversation between Margaret and George. They were in the living room, speaking in hushed tones, but their words carried through the thin walls. "She's not good enough for Thomas. I've always thought so," Margaret said. George's reply was inaudible, but Margaret continued. "If she can't handle this household, maybe she should leave. Thomas could do better." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. Her words replayed in my mind as I struggled to process the betrayal. For years, I had tried to make things work, to keep the peace. But this was too much. The next morning, I called Thomas. "We need to talk," I said. When I told him about the conversation, he was silent for a moment before responding. "I'll handle it when I'm back, Emily. Just hang in there for now." His response felt like a Band-Aid on a deep wound. I knew he meant well, but I also knew that waiting wasn't an option. Something had to change. A week later, an opportunity presented itself. My sister, Rachel, invited Lily and me to stay with her for a while. "Come for a visit," she said. "You need a break." It was the excuse I needed to step away from the chaos. I informed Margaret and George of my plans. Margaret barely looked up from her knitting as I spoke. "Do what you want," she said dismissively. George gave me a polite nod, his expression unreadable. As I packed our bags, Lily's excitement was infectious. "We're going on an adventure, Mom," she said, her eyes sparkling. I smiled, her joy a small reprieve from my anxiety. The drive to Rachel's house was long but liberating. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. Rachel welcomed us with open arms, her warm smile a stark contrast to Margaret's perpetual frown. "You look exhausted," Rachel said as she handed me a cup of tea. "Get some rest. You're safe here." Over the next few days, I began to unwind. Lily played with her cousins, her laughter filling the house. I spent hours talking with Rachel, sharing stories and venting about the struggles I had faced. Her support was a balm to my weary soul. Then, one evening, as we were sitting on the porch, my phone rang. It was Thomas. "Emily, I've spoken to my parents. They've agreed to make some changes. Can we talk about this when I'm back?" I hesitated. The idea of returning to that house, to Margaret's criticism and hostility, filled me with dread. "We'll see," I said, leaving the conversation open-ended. Rachel turned to me after I hung up. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to, Emily. You deserve better." Her words lingered in my mind as I weighed my options. Could I carve out a new life for myself and Lily, away from the toxic environment we had endured? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The days turned into weeks, and Thomas's return drew closer. I knew I had to make a decision. Late one night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat down with a notebook and began to write. Pros and cons, dreams and fears. I poured everything onto the pages. By the time the sun rose, my path was clear. When Thomas returned, he came straight to Rachel's house. He looked tired but hopeful as he stepped through the door. "Emily, can we talk?" he asked. We sat down in the living room, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. "Thomas, I love you," I began. "But I can't go back to that house. It's not just Margaret. It's the environment, the constant stress. I need to think about what's best for Lily and me." Thomas nodded slowly. "I understand. I've been thinking too, and maybe it's time for a change. Maybe we find a place of our own." Relief washed over me as his words sank in. For the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same page. Over the next few months, we worked together to find a new home. It wasn't easy, but the prospect of a fresh start kept us going. Margaret was less than pleased when we told her, but for once, her disapproval didn't faze me. I had made my decision, and I wasn't looking back. As we settled into our new home, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Lily thrived in the new environment, her laughter filling the rooms. Thomas and I began to reconnect, rediscovering the love that had brought us together in the first place. Looking back, I realized that leaving wasn't just about escaping Margaret's toxicity. It was about choosing a life that prioritized joy, love, and mutual respect. It was about showing Lily that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even when it's difficult. In the end, stepping away from that house was the best decision I ever made. It was the start of a new chapter, one filled with hope and possibility. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Several months later, I received an unexpected call from Margaret. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard. "Emily, I'm sorry. I know I've been hard on you. Can we talk?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but neither had my hope for resolution. "I'll think about it," I replied. As I hung up, I felt a mix of emotions. Could this be the start of healing, or was it another manipulation? I decided not to rush into anything. For now, I had my peace, my family, and a future filled with possibilities.